Hello, welcome to another session of the Global Foresight Summit. This year is organized by the APF, the Association of Professional Futurists, the World Futures Review, and us, Fast Forward. And we are here for another really interesting wrap session with Amjad Salim, Sarina Nala, John Sweeney, Jan Hong, and Lei Wing. This time, the focus is Postnormal Religiosity in Pandemic Times, a Polylogue. The roundtable is moderated by John Sweeney. So, John, over to you.
Thank you so much, Fran. I'm delighted to be with this amazing group, and also quite happy to say that I will be co-moderating with my colleague and friend Amjad. And it's really, I think, pretty extraordinary to be able to have this opportunity. One, because actually some of us are literally meeting each other for the first time at this event, even though we've written a paper together, and we'll talk more about that in just a bit. But I think that the opportunity to share the thinking that we did together, and it really was a collective thinking process for us, is exciting because we wanted to use the pandemic and use the opportunity to have this novel approach to thinking and writing together to talk and to think about something that sometimes within the context of futures doesn't get a lot of attention. There's lots of emphasis on the shiny new technologies, or of course, what does the post-COVID future look like? But to actually look and think about religion, about tradition, about culture, about identity, and to think about, what does the pandemic mean with regards to shifts that we've seen, with regards to challenges, obstacles, social pressures, social tensions. So lots of things sort of popping up. So again, it's really a pleasure and an honor and a privilege to be with this amazing group and to be able to talk about why we decided to take on this question. The article that we have put together will be published as part of a special issue on Postnormal Times that will be forthcoming in the journal World Futures Review. And we're also happy to share more information on that. We'll put that into the chat below on YouTube once it's available. But I'm really excited, mostly because I've known Amjad for a few years now, when we both worked at the International Federation of Red Cross and Crescent Societies. And we seemed to do something right because we still stayed in touch with each other and wanted to find ways of collaborating. And so this was an opportunity that Amjad had reached out to me about, and was really excited to be able to collaborate with him and invite others to participate in it. And we'll talk more about the process as it goes on. But Amjad, maybe toss it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, John. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. I think we have everyone on almost all time zones here. So great to have everyone here. Thank you, John, for the introduction. And it's a real pleasure to be here to share some thoughts with you. I work, my day job, as John was saying, I work with the International Federation of Red Cross Red Crescent Societies, where I did collaborate with John on some work around futures and foresight when we did the Strategy 2030 process. But this idea around future studies has interested me for a while. And so I've been thinking about how we can look at things differently. And part of my work and part of my background is really around interreligious dialogue and faith engagement. And so one of the things that really struck me last year was this idea about how 2020 has taught us to maybe question what was normal, conventional, what was orthodox, and question the faith or trust that we had in that. And I sort of wanted to find out whether this was something that would be of interest, particularly when it comes to our own kind of sense of well-being, our own sense of religiosity and belonging. And we were thinking about what does this mean in a post-normal circumstance, right? Where if you sort of read Ziauddin Sardar, he talks about how the conventions of how society is supposed to function have been undermined, and so you find yourself with new and emerging realities that you're not able to grasp. And I really found that fascinating in terms of how we could look at the concept of religiosity, faith belonging. So I was really fascinated to kind of get on this space and start this process. And then we discussed with John, like, how do we do this, right? Do we do it as a typical academic paper, or do we sort of reach out like a Polylogue and sort of get people to contribute, crowdsource this? And we reached out to a number of people, and great to have Zarina, Jean, and Wei Ling. And we have one more person, Said, who unfortunately couldn't join, who actually responded, who were crazy enough to respond, because I actually had a few people coming back saying, what do you mean by a polylogue? I don't really understand what you're trying to do here. And like, you know, some of the academics who had reached out to, they completely, I think for them, this went completely above what they were able to handle, right? They just couldn't understand how you could crowdsource some ideas for a paper. So I'm really glad that you guys were able to join us on this journey. So this conversation is really just to kind of share some thoughts and ideas on that. And we look forward to kind of hearing people's thoughts in the comments. John, back to you. We can maybe start with some of the first few questions.
Yeah, thanks, Amjad. I think to maybe give a little bit of context to, you know, how we're using this term Polylogue. So of course, Polylogue is meant to be a bit of a shift from the idea of just a dialogue to bring in multiple perspectives, multiple ways of conceiving. And actually the term itself has a unique history. So it's tied to waves of feminism in the 1960s and 70s. And the idea of a polylogue is not just like multiple people speaking, but multiple logics, multiple worldviews, multiple ways of conceiving of space and time. And it's really meant to be this radical shift into thinking not just through different lenses, but also from radically different perspectives. And so we really wanted this to be, as Amjad said, something that was crowdsourced and something that wasn't just with a single voice. Of course, the idea of two people writing together and thinking together is automatically going to be this creative process, and it's a process often that leads to creative tensions. But how do you bring in all of these voices and let people own their voice and holistically have that be something that is tied together? So that's what we really were trying to do, and again, trying to bring some rigor to that as an approach as well. So to kick off our polylogue, we thought it would be really great to ask everyone exactly what motivated them. As Amjad mentioned, it's kind of a crazy request, a crazy response. What brought you to participate in this process? And so I think we'll toss it first over to Jean. And Jean, also please introduce yourself as well.
Jean, you're on mute.
Hi, thanks for having me, and your introduction earlier. Too kind, really, saying such great things about us, like we're nice people and whatnot. That's lovely. Thank you, John. I'm here from New York, and I am a nonprofit professional working in advocacy, everything from education to community-based organizing and a lot of policy-heavy work, and from local, federal, and state, particularly here in New York and New York City. So my push is, my contribution was about the Asian American Buddhist community and how there is extreme isolation due to COVID and the problems that were exacerbated due to COVID. So a lot of things that are underlying, already existing, poverty, lack of education, lack of access, and unfortunately the rise in racism, particularly an international issue and a very hot button American issue right now. And a huge spike across the world, and huge spike particularly here in the United States of anti-Asian American racism, sparked by our previous administration, the person that we voted for in Donald Trump, that really sparks a lot of violence. So there's a lot of bad things happening beforehand that a lot of policymakers and a lot of people who are just keeping their eyes open. It doesn't have to be if you're in policy or if you're in futures or if you're really tuned into the post-normative community. You don't even have to. Just keep your eyes open. You see that things are crazy here. And then COVID came, blew everything up, and I joined this and wrote what I did out of frustration, truly, that things are happening and you feel very helpless, to be honest. And I'm really glad to be able to put pen to paper and type away, pen to paper and type away, and share these frustrations and let it go somewhere where people can read and understand and talk and share as well. So thank you for having me.
Great. No, thank you, Jean. And just that sense of isolation and frustration, I think, is something that well, I think was also, I guess, part of what we wanted to kind of get people to understand, right? I mean, because I think all of us I think all of us are not within the usual religious space as such, but I think part of, but we all kind of ascribe to some sort of faith and belonging, or some sort of something that holds us to a spiritual element. And I think just to find that opportunity to step outside of our usual spaces and be able to put pen to paper, as you said, I think is something that was also part of that that intervention. Zarina, maybe I can come to you with the same question that John asked, which was, what motivated you to be part of this process and the writing? Apart from me asking you, which I know that I kind of convinced you, but apart from that.
Yeah, thank you, Amjad. I'll just introduce myself. I'm currently heading future studies at the Rector's Office at the International Islamic University, Malaysia. I just started September last year. And as such, I am also tasked to manage the Office of the UNESCO Chair. And we've just been given the chair just a month ago. We've just sort of signed the legal agreement with UNESCO. And the chair is looking at anticipating sustainability and well-being. Yeah, I've always been in the area of public policy, either in a think tank setting or in a corporate sector setting, always sort of project managing and then engaging stakeholders mainly, and then trying desperately to bridge research and action. And I'm a bit idealistic that way, hoping that, that some recommendations will be implemented. But more often than not, we find that it's really difficult to get It's really difficult to get policymakers to implement recommendations, no matter how good they are. I mean, a lot of factors come into consideration. So it's interesting. So now that I'm in future studies, I'm saying the same thing to everybody, that the futures framework needs to be used to try and make policymakers look at futures differently, so they can actually act on the recommendations. Anyway, sorry, Amjad, coming back to your question. What motivated me to be part of this? I was going to shout out you, Amjad, it was you, but no. I was going to say that what motivated me is strangely what I privately was actually privately intrigued by what I was observing in my society, the changes that I saw, I was witnessing. I was overwhelmed, in fact, that I didn't expect the religious community to be so creative. They did not take too well to the lockdown, and they started becoming very vocal about it. And when the government didn't want to back down, that's when I saw that they were trying to pick up digital skills. They were not interested in IT at all before that. And suddenly they were picking up these skills so that they can keep their programs alive. And I think they were compelled to do that because they didn't want to let that part of their lives go. I personally know an 84-year-old woman who knows how to operate Zoom. From she didn't even know what app was for the longest time. Okay, she had one of those non-smartphone for like a decade, and suddenly she could operate Zoom. It was amazing. I mean, I actually know her personally, and there's just so many stories, anecdotes that I could share with you, but obviously the word limit, wouldn't allow me. I could just go on and on forever. But these were my private observations, really, and I never shared it with anyone. And when you came up with this question, would you be willing to write something? And I remember I was one of those who asked you, what's a polylogue? Like, what is it all about? And thank you for your patience. I'm really, really happy I wrote that piece. So thanks a lot. I'll stop there.
Great, thank you, Serena. And I think that this idea of different people learning new skills, and I think this is something that I think intrigued John and I when we started talking about this, right? Was how have we learned to adapt, and what does this mean for us moving forward? Wei Ling, maybe same question to you. Please introduce yourself as well and sort of share your motivations to be part of this, because I know that, if I remember correctly, you were one of the very first to actually jump on this when we sent out the request and sort of say, yes, I'm up for it. Please tell us tell me how I can get involved.
So I'm from Singapore. Oops, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, hi everyone. So I'm Wei Ling, originally from Singapore, but right now I'm in Hong Kong. So when I was in Singapore, I was part of this organization called Roses of Peace, which is a youth organization that actually helps to promote like inter-religious understanding between people in Singapore as well as our overseas counterparts. So what actually motivated me to get in touch with like interfaith activities to join this project is more of like my reflection in life with regards to religion. So growing up in Singapore, I actually felt that even though I'm surrounded by people of different faiths, you know, I never really understood like what it means, because like people go on PowerPoint and they're like, okay, like this is Hari Raya, like this is whatever festival, and then at the end you're like, you're done. Like even like within like the Chinese community, there's like many different ways that people celebrate like their own religion, right? Like you have Chinese Muslims, they celebrate it a bit differently from like Malay Muslims or like Indian Muslims. So it was just really fascinating. So when I went over to the UK to study, people actually were a bit more proactive. And I think that's also because in Singapore, you don't want to rock the boat. You don't want to be too preachy. You don't want to try to be so proactive in front of people such that you're like forcing down your religion. I think that's always that fine line we walk in. So we take the more conservative side. So probably like because UK, they are a bit like more progressive as well as an older nation. So they kind of found that line. So I got to learn a lot about different religions, like the Sikh religion, like Islam, so many different ones. And I was like, oh wait, I never knew about that in Singapore. You know, like I was just a bit shook. And I got involved in like chaplaincy work, so dealing with a lot of like interfaith things. So when I went back to Singapore, I started to get involved in this, and then on the paper. So it was really interesting because when COVID hit, like all of us, we couldn't go to church, we couldn't go to the temples, to the mosques, and then people were like, okay, let's learn how to use the computer. Even like 50, 60 years old, they're like, okay, I guess I have no choice, you know. Can't be talking to my wife all day or my kids all day. They'll drive me crazy. So you're like, you know, we just really desire like the human connection, even if it's not physical, if it's not like face to face. And then we get, you know, sermons on Zoom and stuff. And just as well, I just popped by, you know, my friends in the UK, and I was like, hi, I turned out on their Zoom, and they were clearly not expecting me. Like that would not happen. Imagine like this like 200-year-old congregation, you know, they never done like Zoom, and like now when they open it up and they saw me coming in, and then people who used to attend like like service, so they started like jumping in, and I thought that was so interesting. So that inspired like my piece, which is on God's Wi-Fi signal. You know, like we always want God's signal, but now, you know, it's transmitted through Wi-Fi. So I just thought it's a really like interesting topic to explore. Prior to that, we do have like YouTube. Some religious institutions, they do have like recording that's being played over YouTube, TV, but never before has it been such a wide-scaled project initiative where people are like, okay, we only have virtual events, and even elderly people, they start learning what is Zoom. It's just so incredible. Even my mom, like she's like learning how to like use like YouTube, Facebook, just because she's like, I can't do anything else. I now have the time to like play around with all these tools, And I think it's still a long way to go before we turn everything virtual, because I still believe that some things you need that in-person experience, like baptism, you can't really do like a virtual baptism. I mean, there's, you lose a bit of the symbolism, but still, we are exploring how we can actually move virtually in case something happens. Like, what if someone's disabled? You can't really like dump that person, into the waters and stuff. I mean, you could, but then there's lots of risk. So yeah, like what are the ways we can explore? Like we see religion literally changing in front of us on a mass scale. Normally like it's always like little bits and pieces. They change a bit, they do this a bit, and now you have like this 180 degrees change. And I just thought that was such an interesting topic to explore. And because this topic wasn't quite explored before like I wrote it, so it brings on like this really like exciting spin on what I can do with this information and all this real life experience that's being recounted by people on the internet. So yeah, and I do think that in future maybe there are more ways, like the way we worship, the way we pray, the way we conduct certain rituals, it might change with changing societal needs, with technological advancement. Maybe next time we would zoom in from Mars, I don't know. So yeah, just really fascinating. And yeah, I shall end here. Yep.
Thanks, Wei Ling. I think one of the things that's really become apparent and certainly is present in the piece is of course how how different traditions and how whether it's faith-based or whether it's like identity, culture, this movement to want to have that sort of human touch and connection, and as we've seen, of course, for many that was the primary challenge of the pandemic. But also in other contexts, what we saw was super spreader events were happening at at weddings and at funerals, and even just recently in India, Kumbh Mela, which is one of the largest pilgrimages in the world. They think that might have actually spurred the most recent waves. So there is this fundamental question around how do we find ways of expressing religiosity during these times, especially when it feels like it's most needed. And so actually, Amjad, I'm going to ask you the same question. I'll put on my moderator hat. What made you participate? Aside from the fact that we said we would finally do something together, what drew you to this project and this specific question? And of course, I know your background and interest in religion, and we've talked a lot about that. But yeah, what was it about this in particular that really roped you in?
I think there were two things that for me that was quite interesting, right? So the first one was this concept of I think, as Wei Ling said, this almost like an Uberization of faith services, right? So previously, you would go to one community, one place of worship, and you would have one religious leader, and often that can be inaccessible to certain people, whether you're disabled or whether of a different gender, whatever. But suddenly now you have the opportunity to dial in to services across the world, and so I think for me, this idea of that an Uberization was something that was really interesting to me. And how do you then start to understand and engage with faith and religiosity differently? But actually, the one that really interested me was before that was when I was speaking to a friend of mine who actually is a pastor in a church in Geneva. And he said two things for me. He said that I've had to become tech support now, right? Because I'm sort of giving my sermons, but I'm also having to sort of tell people how to switch the camera on, switch their mics off. I'm going to do it. So I've become almost tech support on this. And then he goes, and because I'm doing all of that, I can't enjoy spirit. I can't have that spiritual effect, feeling of conducting the religious service. So it's, for me, I'm so focused on delivering the service and ensuring that mics are off, cameras are off, and all of this. I don't get that spiritual benefit, right? And that struck me really interesting, because for me, it asked me the question, like, okay, you're expected to motivate all of us. You are a religious leader. You're supposed to be there to help all of us doing. Who's helping you, right? Who's kind of giving that support to you? Who's your tech support? And one can say, well, you're a religious leader. You have an open conversation with God, but actually, that it's more than that, right? How are we supporting that? So I think that really sparked in me a question about how do we approach this differently, and how are we supposed to have that conversation in a way that matters. And so I think that's what sparked it. And then, of course, reading the papers, and I think Wei Ling's title of God's Wi-Fi signal for me was just like, okay, this is really for us, how we kind of explore this topic in a way that makes sense. So people need to understand it.
Yeah, and I think the one thing that I was struck as the papers were coming in, and as we were putting this together, and as I was having my own sort of crisis of faith, so to speak, and what am I going to write and contribute to this, it was really fascinating to reflect on the moment that I decided to put in the piece, which was leaving Kazakhstan. So at the time I had a professorship based in Kazakhstan, and I decided to, of course, to be with family, and my wife's family is from Belarus. So it was, all right, let's fly to Belarus. Last flight out of Kazakhstan before the big lockdown. And there I found myself, praying on the 5 a.m. flight. And being raised Catholic, you're clearly, predisposed towards not being religious later in life. So it was this odd sort of moment of realization of, wait a second, like, am I, what does that tell me about this moment? What does it, say about my own privilege and my own faith? And as someone who, spends a lot of time thinking about the future, it was this sort of visceral feeling of being, confronted with the present, that felt, absolutely, needing to pray in that moment. And as someone who travels a lot, not necessarily praying on flights, not even a quick cross before takeoff. So it was an interesting space to be in, and I think that's one of the questions that we had asked, and would love to go with that question as well. Is there, of course, the challenges felt really present, right? The isolation, the quarantine, the lockdown, the uncertainty. But there's also, of course, the openness of connecting in other ways. And so, yeah, I would love to open it up, and we'll just make it an open conversation at this point. What were some of those spiritual challenges? What were some of those spiritual epiphanies? And at the risk of getting overly personal, opening it up to reflect on maybe some learnings or insights in relation to. Yeah, and then of course it would be great to also think about what does that mean for the future of religiosity? What does those experiences look like in this sort of ongoing and emerging sort of post-pandemic space? And again, we'll open it up.
Can I say something? Oh, sorry, I thought I was on mute. Actually, yeah, because Muslims pray in congregation a lot, at the mosque 5 times a day. You're encouraged more for the men than the women, depends on, who you speak to. And then you've got the Friday prayers, which is like, sometimes, you have all types of practicing Muslims. Some of them don't pray Monday to Thursday, but they'll go for the Friday prayers. And there's some who don't pray at all. They just pray for their Eid prayers, like, during the Eidul Fitri, the big celebration after the fasting month. That's really big in Malaysia and Brunei and in the Nusantara region, they call it, But the second big Eid is bigger in like the subcontinent, Eid al-Adha. But for the Nusantara, the Indonesians, Malaysians, Singaporeans, Bruneians, it's more Eidul Fitri. It's like, the big party after the fasting month ends. So they will go to the mosque. And so the congregation is a huge, big feature of the Islamic faith. And to have, the head of the religious state, if you like, the mufti, saying that we're going to have to stop Friday prayers, it was a shock. I mean, I don't think it's ever happened in the history of Malaysia, really, In fact, I can speak for the whole of our region. I think maybe in times of war, the Japanese occupation, that may have happened, but if not, never ever has that never happened. So I think that was really tough, John. It was really tough, and so people were like, what do we do? And the religious leaders needed to persuade them and tell them, God does not love you less. You'll need to toe the line, and you can pray at home. There are ways to go about it, right? Amjad, you know that. So what happened? So that was one. It was really a difficult pill to swallow, but that opened the floodgates for a lot of other lockdowns, like Hari Raya and stuff. And there was like this, you get up in the night prayer to pray again in congregation. That's not happening. So they started resorting to Zoom, where you could hear the voice of the religious leader praying, or you needed to read the remembrance. It's called dhikrullah, like dhikr, like remembrance, and they like to say sort of read it together in one voice, and then that they also resorted to Zoom, and it was quite comical, because exactly I can really understand the comments you made about the pastor, right? It's actually just a technical issue. You'd find your passion to speak passionately, but someone else is in charge of muting people who forget to mute themselves and interrupt the congregation prayers or interrupt this. It's like a Zen moment, like it's almost like yoga or whatever. You focus, and everyone's really peaceful, and then suddenly someone's mute button is unmute, and you hear some rude noise from the kitchen, and then the members of the congregation, they get really annoyed and angry, and I've seen that it can be quite comical. So then someone his job is to keep muting. You have to keep muting, because some people say, I don't know how to mute, or I pressed a keyboard by accident. I didn't even know it was unmute. So it's actually, I put it to technical details and technical know-how, because a preacher will always be able to preach. Whether you're standing at the podium or whether you're looking at the camera, the passion is there. It's just a matter of getting used to it, of sort of talking to a laptop. Like right now, I think like my child may think I'm crazy, right? Because I'm like mommy's talking to herself in her room to a laptop. There's no one in the room. So it's a bit strange, but I kind of believe that I've lived to see a day where the congregation prayers are no more at the moment. And so what they do is they tell us to set up mosques at home. That's the tagline. The mosque outside the house is shut, but the mosques at home are open. So you sit with your families and you pray together. And the Prime Minister tried to tell everyone that was his mantra. It was sweet. People were impressed. Oh, the Prime Minister of Malaysia is praying with his son, his wife, his helpers. So I think it allowed politicians to also be very creative in how to capitalize on the moment, to also, be exemplary and just rise to the occasion, really. I just think it was heartwarming. It just shows the human spirit. It shows that we can survive. And it shows that we are very creative and we underestimate what we're all about. Yeah. Thank you.
Hey, this is Jean. I'm going to jump in. So I'm going to comment on one of the commenters. Kin Lo mentioned that it's about accessibility and for Wi-Fi and internet. And I wrote about that in my piece, again, adding to the frustration. So here in the United States, it's really, really, really frustrating that we're supposedly a super rich country, and yet we can't afford treating internet as a utility, or we cannot, just a lot of basic things that COVID has really revealed to be necessities of life that our policymakers keep saying, like, nah, you good, you don't need it, you fine, you fine. No, we need Wi-Fi. That's our livelihoods. Whether it's to go to school, whether it's to see your doctor, and also to keep spiritual and mental and emotional sanity. We need Wi-Fi to be together, and to stay apart, especially stay apart while being together. And that was one major frustration, particularly here in the States for the Asian American Buddhist community. I think there are a it's again lack of access, poverty, isolation, and language differences. So in Asian American Buddhist demographics, most are older, baby boomer, my mom and my grandma's sort of generation. And everyone younger, my generation and younger, we may or may not speak Chinese or read sutra or be able to read Sanskrit, and to me it's I hate to insult someone by me almost like chuckling like, oh, I can't read Sanskrit, man. But no, we can't. We only grew up learning English, and we're terrible at other languages. In America, we don't learn other languages. We're terrible. Okay, it just doesn't work that way. And so even if your temple is a very well established temple with lots of funding, it has to be a very big temple. We're talking about the Tsujis, we're talking about the Foguanshans, international, very big. Then yeah, they have some services online, but is it in English? Can we access it? Is it for everyone? And that is again adding to my frustration of what is available to some people but not others. What are the gatekeepers? What are the things that keep others isolated and alone and feeling even worse during COVID, even more alone? And even if I myself can go to, she's not here with us now anymore, but if I would have set up Wi-Fi with my grandma had Wi-Fi, but she doesn't know how to use it. And am I even able to go to her? Am I even able to show her how? We, again, in New York, we don't really have intergenerational homes. Some do, not all. Other countries and cultures, they have like it's up to like 4 generations, 5 generations, all living in the same household, which is great, but not so much here. So the isolation extends further that you can't even get assistance if you wanted it. So again, it's very hopeful when I do see it, but I'm the negative person, and I can only see the holes of the people who are left out, and it drives me nuts, and it makes me like write emails to my politicians, and it goes nowhere. But please keep pouring in the inspirational stories because I need those to keep going.
Can I comment on something? So one of the commenter, Kin Lo, was mentioning about how some of the churches actually help to conduct baptism by sprinkling waters on people's head, if they can't go to church and stuff. So it's just one bad example. Like, I'm pretty sure that there are many examples to show the restrictions where you can't do things physically. But like, I also think about how there were lots of articles that came out about ableism. That means, like, we don't think about what happens with people with disabilities, like either physically or like mentally. I know of people who are like, they're so introverted or like filled with so much social anxiety that like, like I can't go to church, I can't go to school. Like friends who tell me I can't wake up in the morning because the thought about going to lecture on that day just fears me. Like I can't understand it, like, and I don't want to pretend I can understand it, I just know like it's terrible. But like because in our world, we judge a person by the typical things like how capable are they of holding that discipline, because we are judging them based on our ability. To us, it's no worries, but someone else might find it really hard. So there was like this article that came out when COVID first hit, and people were like, ha ha ha, you people can do this, you're as crippled as us, and that got me like, thinking like, how can we better accommodate, people, how can we accommodate people who can't fit into certain ways we do things, like I'm gonna throw a few like bad examples, sorry, because I'm just thinking of the top of my head. Maybe people were like, I can't take bread, from communion because, there's like all these germs and stuff. And, for us, pre-COVID, we're like, what's the deal? It's just bread, you're just sharing, But now we're like, oh no, I can't touch it, like COVID. And then we are starting to understand how it feels like, to be so helpless, to be so vulnerable. And I'm sure there's many other examples that shows, how things are changing. And maybe, this is a sign from God, who is like, you people who are so high and mighty for so long, like now it's time for you to, understand how people feel. And that is kind of like, the fasting practiced by, Muslim, Catholics, Buddhism, like, understanding how people feel, when they have no food, okay, they have no water. I feel like it's kind of that way. Except that, okay, some of the religions, it is compulsory, or at the very least they encourage you, so I feel like sometimes it's nice to have some adversity so that we understand, so that we know, we are still humans, whatever we do, we are still susceptible to forces of nature, acts of God. Sorry, the pun. So that really, it really makes us feel like, okay, like we are not that high and mighty anymore, like, so yeah, I feel that, COVID, it is terrible, so many people lost their lives, their health, yeah, but in a way, it does show that, we need to start really showing empathy to people, who are not so able as us. And, you can't just, not just pigeonholing people to certain ways of doing things and be like, nope, a congregation, a church section means that you have to be in church, you have to be in temple and stuff, I feel like, we need to start thinking about how we do things. We can't just follow religion, like, so tradition, like blindly. But we have to explore, like, what are better ways to do things? What are ways where we make things better for everyone?
Great, thank you, Wei-Ling. I think that idea of almost you're democratizing the space for spiritual engagement, right? I I know that in terms of digital divide and accessibility to internet, I think that's one thing, but on the whole, you're looking at that. And I think as Zarina was also mentioning that, in some parts of the world, some of the Muslim communities where, for example, women don't really access the mosque very easily, or don't have access to the imams or whatever. This time around, you had them coming into your living room and sort of talking and engaging in a way that was much more personable. So I think that space has been there, and I think that for me is the real excitement about this paper and sort of thinking about where this leads. What is the future of spiritual engagement, in this post-normal? Because I think this is, there's no more post-COVID, right? I think we are in what would be the reality is such, and so I think that we need to be thinking about that a lot more, and just having access across the world. And so again, I was reflecting on one of the people that I spoke to when I was kind of looking at my contribution paper. Was a rabbi, and he was telling me that he has people joining his congregation from like Australia to the US and everything, because like they don't really, like, some people didn't really like their rabbis, right? And so they had stumbled on his sermon online and somehow then started following him. And these would be people like, he's in the UK, so when he was doing his sermons, it's like early morning Australia, but they would still they'd still be up in the morning because they wanted to kind of follow him. And so I think that space has been made open. Of course, it adds more pressure, because then now you're no longer your local city priest. You're now a global person. You're also expected now to not only look after sort of the spiritual kind of efforts, but also some sort of issues around mental health, loneliness, tech support, all of those things. And you're then supposed to kind of, we often forget, right? All of us had some level of mental strain due to lockdown. Imagine now a religious leader who has to do that to his or her congregation. How are they supposed to be supported and looked after. And so I think for me, these are some of the questions that I think have been posed and that we'd love to kind of take some of the conversation forward. So I think that there's a lot more that's coming in the space, and from the comments as well, I can see that there's a lot of interest there. So I think we definitely have a lot more to say in this regard. But it was a really interesting conversation and interesting reflections and nice to get out of our comfort zone and think about this in a different way. John, I'm going to kind of leave it to you maybe to take us home in terms of the last few minutes.
Thanks, Amjad. I'll see if I can make it through and possibly open it up again, depending upon, well, I guess to go with the metaphor, if the spirit moves me or not. I think what's really interesting about some of the experiences I had, and of course thinking about my my quick prayer on the plane, but also the opportunity I had at the end of last year to teach a course on the futures of religion through KazNU, the National Kazakh University. And it was a class that was actually taught in Kazakh language, which, as you can imagine, I don't speak Kazakh language. So the whole course was in translation. We had students from Eastern Kazakhstan, Western China, and we were, of course, exploring real time what was this extraordinary unfolding event. And what's fascinating is, some of the students, of course, were talking about some of the experiences and saying, actually, Fridays and Friday prayers are a day to be away from family, and a day to like have a sense of freedom that they didn't have otherwise. And so, I had students who had, connection problems and didn't have access, solid access, and were connecting on mobile devices and feeling that strain. And so, here we are in a class, right, in a university course talking about the future of religion, but they were feeling viscerally that sort of deprivation of spirituality, which I think has come up in the chat, is so much about space, and is so much about congregation, and is so much about being in a space with others and friends and having that open space to be able to connect. And I think that's something that was also quite profound and interesting. Was, of course, there was so much connectedness and so much opportunity, and of course it was allowing this innovation to happen. And religions have always been early adopters of technologies and have always responded to crises in really dynamic ways, whether it's imams in the 70s using cassette tapes, or whether it was the explosion of religious websites that we saw in the 90s and the early 2000s, or of course the utilization of social media as that began to emerge. So I suppose there is this sort of lingering question around what's going to stick. What is spirituality and what are practices going to look like? What are we going to hold on to, and how are we going to find ways to confront these huge questions? I know another big thing that really struck me about some of the things I was hearing was, of course, the disproportionate violence against women and children during this time, right? So as families were together, and as the uncertainty rose, and as the economic crises began to be felt, of course that led to a huge spike in various forms of domestic and spousal violence. And so it wasn't just a crisis of faith. It was a crisis in many homes in different contexts all over the world. And so we talk about sort of the preacher, the pastor, the imam as the sort of, the tech, but also not being able to intervene, right? Realizing or sensing or seeing a problem and feeling like they didn't have the means to be able to, be in that space or to help in a meaningful way, literally because there was no space for them to, to enter into, or there was no space to be able to, have a meaningful dialogue. And so I think, these kinds of questions, and I think, Amjad, as you pointed out, this is something that is not to be seen as an anomaly. We can view 2020 as the craziest year of the century so far, or the calmest year of the century to come. And I think if we take the idea of post-normal time seriously, it's the latter, not the former, which is to say, with climate change, with the kinds of political maneuverings that we're seeing, with all of these trends and forces and issues converging and cascading upon each other, it's very likely that we are, well, as the saying goes, or the curse goes, may you live in interesting times. So I think, religion is going to have to find its way of being expressed through these different, forces in media. And I think it's really been, again, a pleasure and a privilege to be able to talk through and explore this with all of you. And I'm really excited to see the piece published, really excited to see reactions to it. And most importantly, I hope we keep the conversation going. So yeah, I guess I'll pause and end there with a thanks. And yeah, really excited and thankful for all of you into joining in this Polylogue and journeying together.
Great. Thank you so much, John, for moderating that. Thank you everyone for your comments as well. It's been really great. Fran, back to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, John, Amjad, Tarina, Jen, and Wei Ling. It was super interesting. I'm really sorry that we only had 1 hour, because I have the feeling that this would be a longer conversation if we will have room for more deeper conversation. But yeah, we need to end here. So thank you everyone for joining the Global Foresight Summit. Thank you for your time, and thank you to all the audience also for watching us.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
We are back in 2 minutes with the next speaker, David Wegen. So yeah, we'll see you in 2 minutes. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.